quick video, 5 or so reasons why we should be supporting Bernie Sanders over Elizabeth Warren. So, first of all, this is in no particular order. And so the first point is that Elizabeth Warren voted for Trump's 2017 military budget, which actually gave him uh, tens of billions of more dollars than he was actually requesting. Bernie voted against that. I believe as well, Bernie's the only candidate to have not voted or supported any of Trump's military budgets. And as I said, Elizabeth Warren voted for Trump's military budget in 2017. And as I said, that actually gave him more money than he was requesting. So Trump was requesting an increase of 54 billion. The bill that Elizabeth Warren voted for gave him an additional $80 billion. So if Trump's this dangerous, maniac who is a existential threat to, the world and everybody else, why would you in good conscience vote to give him more money and more military power? It doesn't really, make sense at all, especially when, we have so many things domestically that could be much better used for those billions of dollars, like healthcare, like education, like infrastructure, like a Green New Deal, like universal preschool, and the list goes on. Additionally, so Bernie advocates for canceling all of the 1.5 or 1.6 trillion dollars of student loan debt that students or borrowers in the United States now have, and Elizabeth Warren doesn't go that far. She only wants to give debt relief, 50,000 of it to households making up to $100,000 a year, and then for households making between $100,000 and $250,000 a year, they would get some relief, and then people making over 250K would get no relief. Again, Bernie wants to get rid of everybody's student debt, and Elizabeth Warren only wants to get rid of it for some people. So again, Bernie's position there is just, a lot better in, my opinion. Additionally, Bernie's been unequivocal, at least since the late 80s, if not sooner, about his support for Medicare for All or universal healthcare, and it's one of his top priorities. He mentions it during most campaign stops. He mentioned it a lot during the last presidential debate, and it's something that he said he will fight for. Basically, like from the first days in office, they will introduce legislation to try to make that a reality, so people aren't dying because they don't have lack of access to healthcare. People aren't going bankrupt because they have these outrageous medical bills. And Elizabeth Warren, she waffles back and forth between her support for Medicare for All, and then now she introduced her healthcare plan recently, and after she did, what do you know, her polls dropped quite substantially because people are able to see through it that no, actually you don't really support Medicare for All. You're doing this really ridiculous push where you first try to get a public option passed, and then a couple of years later, when you've already used up all of that political capital for that first push to try to get a public option, and then a couple years later, if things are going well, you'll try to advocate or pass Medicare for All. So it's like, no, Elizabeth Warren, you don't really support Medicare for All, so that's another big strike against you. Bernie's been, as I said, unequivocal in his support for Medicare for All for many decades. He's the only one that I trust to actually fight for that, and it's such a huge issue. Literally 30 to 45,000 people in the United States die each year because they don't have health care. Over 500,000 people a year go bankrupt because they don't have health care. Fighting for a public option is not going to fix it. We need we need health care that covers everybody, or we're still going to have people going bankrupt and dying, and a public option would just create a two-tiered system where the healthy and the wealthy would get private insurance and everybody would get pushed off to this public option, making it more expensive as well as delaying the likelihood of getting Medicare for all at some point. So another strike against Elizabeth Warren there. Bernie also advocates for canceling all medical debt. To my knowledge, Elizabeth Warren hasn't came out and said that's something that she will do. And again, the United States being, it's like the only developed or industrialized country in the world that doesn't have universal health care. So we're, the really only country out of these industrialized nations that has, people taking on tens, if not sometimes hundreds of $1,000s of medical debt, things that if we had Medicare for all, people wouldn't be incurring these huge, outrageous bills and expenses. Bernie wants to help people out, that have, this medical debt and cancel it. Elizabeth Warren doesn't. I think that was 5. I'll do an extra one, and I could go on. These are just some of the first ones that came to mind. So Bernie's position on Venezuela, while not being perfect, is definitely better than Elizabeth Warren. So he was asked by the Center for Foreign Relations, I believe is the organization, about what he would do with regards to Venezuela. Said he wanted to listen to the people of Venezuela about the economic sanctions that have been put in place there by the Trump administration, because he realizes that they can do a lot of harm to the public. So it sounds like he would probably take the economic sanctions off the country of Venezuela, which is really important because the the Center for Economic and Policy Research, they released a report not too long ago, you can look it up, where the Trump sanctions, I believe, have killed over 40,000 people in Venezuela, and Elizabeth Warren supports these sanctions that have killed tens of thousands of innocent people in Venezuela. She also supports the unelected, puppet Juan Guaido, the U.S. puppet Juan Guaido, as the president of Venezuela, even though he was never elected to that position. And it was like a couple percentage of people actually knew who he was before the U.S. came in and started, trying to prop him up in order to overthrow the Maduro government. And obviously we are only trying to overthrow the Maduro government because he has, socialist leaning, ideology and policies that, benefit the vast majority of people in Venezuela. That's why we got to get rid of him, because he's looking out for the best interest of his people and not, multinational, corporations. So that's, that's why we got to support Juan Guaido, because, he would open the country up to our, corporations in other countries to, pollute and extract resources and, exploit the people for profit. And so this is the, Juan Guaido is the person that would do the bidding of the U.S., and Elizabeth Warren supports this person as president, even though he was never elected to that position, and Maduro was, and, what was definitely a fair election, at least by the UN standards, to my understanding. And this isn't to say that, there aren't problems with Nicolas Maduro, but there's no reason that we need to be interfering in any way in, Venezuela, unless it's, diplomatically or with humanitarian aid. Economic sanctions are a form of warfare that are, by and large, targeted at the civilian population, resulting in, a lot of suffering and eventual death on the, civilian population. Elizabeth Warren supports that. Bernie Sanders doesn't. Those are 6 reasons why we need to support Bernie Sanders over Elizabeth Warren. We can see it's both within the domestic realm as well as the foreign policy realm. And I will add a 7th one because it's also really important. Bernie Sanders has said that he will aid to Israel will be on the table if they aren't, able to start respecting the human rights of the Palestinian people, basically, and start treating them with some dignity and respect. That doesn't get in order, then our gargantuan military aid and just aid in general that we give to the Israeli government will be on the table. That's super important. To my understanding, Elizabeth Warren hasn't came out and isn't in support of that position, so there's a bonus seventh reason why we need to support Bernie Sanders over an eight. Sorry, I'm gonna add another one just because it's also foreign policy related. So we have a good mix of domestic and then foreign policy to see that Bernie Sanders is the best on both fronts. And I don't know why I'm doing that, but it's kind of funny. So when Lula was, in jail on those trumped up politically motivated charges in Brazil, Bernie Sanders was the only Democratic candidate running for president to speak out, against Lula's, unlawful and politically motivated imprisonment, called him a, political prisoner. And then I believe he also, tweeted about Lula, getting released and saying that was a good thing. Obviously, to my knowledge, I haven't seen anything from Elizabeth Warren about the time that Lula was incarcerated or in prison due to these politically motivated and trumped up charges. So she didn't speak out against Lula's imprisonment. Bernie Sanders did. So I guess that is now 8 reasons why we should support Bernie Sanders over Elizabeth Warren. And I would love to hear your thoughts. If there are any other ones that I'm missing, please leave them in the comment sections below. And once I get to 50 subs or subscribers, I will take a polar plunge. And it's currently winter here in the Pacific Northwest, so it would be quite chilly, and I would document it on the GoPro. Peace and much love.